Publicly shamed, an art restorer watched her life crumble as she was framed for massive fraud. But just as the law closed in, a dark, silent mafia boss stepped from the shadows. He didn't just save her from prison, he demolished her tormentor's empire, declaring, "You're mine now." She escaped one trap, only to fall into the possessive grasp of a mafia boss. What dangerous price would her new freedom demand? The scent of turpentine and old canvas clung to Anya Petrova, a second skin she wore proudly, even as she wiped down the cold, gleaming surfaces of the display cases at Blackwood Auction House. Her hands, usually delicate instruments of restoration, moved with practiced efficiency, a mundane task for a talent as refined as hers. At 26, Anya possessed a rare gift, an innate understanding of art, a painter's eye, and a surgeon's precision when breathing life back into canvases ravaged by time. But here, amidst the hushed grandeur of Blackwood, her gifts were largely overlooked, drowned out by the glint of expensive jewelry and the clinking of champagne flutes at exclusive preview events she was never invited to. She was merely a cog, a quiet artisan in a machine that valued profit above all else. The auction house was a temple of wealth, a fortress of polished marble and hushed whispers, where fortunes shifted with the rap of a gavel. The air was always heavy with the smell of aged wood, expensive cologne, and the faint, almost metallic tang of ambition. Anya moved through it like a shadow, her simple beige uniform a stark contrast to the designer labels that drifted past her. Outside, New York City roared, a symphony of yellow cabs and hurried footsteps, but inside Blackwood, only the softest murmurs were permitted, a reverent silence that felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. A knot tightened in Anya's stomach as she glanced at the time on her cracked phone screen. Another late night. Another hour of menial labor while her true work, the painstaking resurrection of beauty, waited. Her mind, however, wasn't on the priceless antiquity she had meticulously conserved just last week, but on the crumbling brick facade of her family's antique shop, tucked away in a quieter, forgotten corner of the city. Petrova Antiques. A name that once evoked images of exquisite craftsmanship and forgotten histories, now whispered only of mounting debt and desperate hope. Her father, a man whose hands were once as skilled as hers, now trembled with Parkinson's, his memory fading like the pigments on an ancient fresco. His illness had left Anya as the sole caretaker, both of him and of their legacy. Every dime she earned at Blackwood, every extra shift, every sacrifice, was poured into keeping the shop afloat, into buying his medication, into simply surviving. The weight of it was a constant, suffocating pressure, a leaden cloak wrapped around her spirit. "Just a little longer, Papa," she'd whisper to him each night. "We'll find a way." But the ways were dwindling, like sand slipping through her fingers. Silas Blackwood. The name alone was enough to send a chill down her spine, colder than the polished marble beneath her worn work shoes. He wasn't a man who raised his voice, not in the traditional sense. His power was in his silence, in the predatory gleam in his eyes, in the subtle flex of his jaw that spoke volumes more than any shout. He moved like a shark in his own ecosystem, sleek and unfeeling, always sniffing out weakness, always ready to exploit. Anya knew, with a certainty that iced her veins, that Silas saw her desperation. He saw the struggling antique shop, the ailing father, the fierce, almost reckless love she held for her family. And he was beginning to use it. Anya finished polishing a glass cabinet, her reflection staring back at her, tired eyes, a smudge of dust on her cheek, a faint tremor in her usually steady hands. "This isn't where you're meant to be," a voice inside her head whispered, a ghostly echo of her dreams. She had envisioned herself in quiet, sunlit studios, surrounded by works of art, meticulously repairing the ravages of time, honoring the artists, preserving history. Instead, she was cleaning glass, counting pennies, and dreading the inevitable. Her phone buzzed. A text message. Not from her father, not from a friend. The sender ID simply read, SB. Her heart leaped, a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. This was it. The inevitable. She retreated to a dimly lit storage room, away from the few remaining staff members. Her fingers trembled as she opened the message. Anya. Room 3B. The Florentine Madonna. Tonight. Make sure it authenticates. No pleasantries. No questions. Just a command, veiled in a word that twisted her gut into a painful knot. Authenticate. It was a code, a dark euphemism for what Silas truly wanted. The Florentine Madonna was a newly acquired piece, rumored to have a dubious provenance. Silas needed it to be undeniably real, its history flawlessly documented, even if that meant a little creative restoration of its past. And Anya, with her unparalleled skill, was his chosen instrument. A wave of nausea washed over her. Her hands clenched, crumpling the flimsy work rag she held. This wasn't just about polishing glass anymore. This was about outright fraud, about actively participating in the corruption of the very art she revered. Her ethical code, once as unyielding as polished steel, now felt like a fragile piece of parchment, ready to tear under the immense pressure. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. "I can't." But a stark image flashed in her mind, her father, frail and distant, calling out her name in confusion. The for sale sign that would inevitably be hammered into the ground outside their shop. The crushing weight of failing her family. The thought choked her, stealing her breath. What choice did she truly have? She closed her eyes, picturing the Florentine Madonna in her mind. A beautiful, serene face, untouched by the turmoil of its earthly existence. How could she defile something so pure? Yet, how could she let her family drown? The moral conflict was a searing fire in her soul, burning away her last vestiges of idealism. With a heavy sigh, she pushed herself away from the wall, her movements slow, mechanical. The weight of Silas's demand settled upon her shoulders, a burden she couldn't shrug off. She had to do it. She had to. For her father. For the shop. For the desperate hope that one day she might be free of this suffocating darkness. Room 3B. The restoration studio. Her sanctuary, now to become her prison. She knew what awaited her there. The gentle hum of the ventilation system, the clean, sterile scent of the solvents, and the silent accusation of the priceless artwork she was about to betray. Anya felt like a fading masterpiece herself, her colors dulling, her spirit chipping away, piece by painful piece. As she walked down the silent corridor, the only sound the soft click of her shoes on the marble floor, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A chilling sensation, not just from Silas, but from something else, something deeper, more predatory, lurking just beyond the edge of her perception. A shadow, perhaps, preparing to embrace her in its insidious hold. She reached the heavy, unmarked door of room 3B, the last light of the evening filtering through a high window, painting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Anya pushed the door open, stepping into the controlled environment, into the heart of her ethical dilemma. The room was cool, pristine, and waiting. And in the center, bathed in the soft glow of the restoration lamp, sat the Florentine Madonna, its eyes seemingly gazing directly into her soul, judging her. Anya approached the easel, her hands already trembling. She knew what she had to do. The lies she had to weave into the fabric of history, the truth she had to bury. And as she picked up her tools, the faint creak of the studio door closing behind her, not quite latching, sent a shiver down her spine. She was alone, isolated, and irrevocably trapped. The sterile scent of solvents and the faint, sweet perfume of antique wood filled room 3B, a deceptive calm that did little to soothe Anya's churning stomach. She stood before the Florentine Madonna, a masterpiece of Renaissance devotion, its serene eyes gazing into an eternity she couldn't comprehend. The canvas, aged but vibrant, held a tiny, almost invisible tear near the Virgin's clasped hands, a flaw that Silas Blackwood had meticulously pointed out, a test of her skill and, more insidiously, a reminder of her precarious position. Fixing it was her current escape, a brief reprieve from the gnawing dread of the forged signature that awaited her. Each delicate stroke of her brush was an act of defiance against the corruption she felt closing in. Anya adjusted the high-intensity lamp, casting a precise pool of light on the delicate fissure. Her breath hitched. The pressure to restore this piece to perfection was immense, not just for the painting's intrinsic value, but because she knew Silas had specific, unspoken plans for it. And for her. The thought sent a tremor through her fingers, threatening to smudge the minuscule restoration work. She willed her hands to steady, focusing on the intricate patterns of the old paint, on the quiet rhythm of her own breathing. Just focus on the art, she told herself, but nothing else in. The silence of the studio, usually a comfort, felt heavy tonight, almost suffocating. It was broken only by the soft hum of the air purifier and the rhythmic, almost hypnotic scrape of her palette knife against the small mixing board. The city outside was a distant, muted roar, a world away from this isolated chamber where time itself seemed to stretch and warp. Then a subtle shift. Not a sound, not a scent, but a change in the very texture of the air. A sudden awareness, prickling at the nape of her neck. Anya froze, her brush hovering millimeters from the canvas. She hadn't heard the door open, hadn't detected a single footfall. Yet she was no longer alone. She didn't dare turn immediately. Her heart, a frightened bird, hammered against her ribs, echoing in her ears. Every nerve ending screamed an alert. Was it Silas coming to check on her, to apply more pressure? The thought made her stomach clench. Slowly, carefully, Anya pivoted. He stood by the heavy oak door, which now rested ajar, a sliver of darkness from the corridor beyond painting a stark contrast around his powerful silhouette. Lorenzo Moretti. He was taller than she remembered from the fleeting glimpse she'd had during the day, broader, his presence filling the vast studio with an undeniable, almost suffocating intensity. He was clad in a black, impeccably tailored suit, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb the ambient light. His dark hair, neatly cut, gleamed under the soft glow. He looked less like a man and more like a force of nature, contained within an impossibly elegant frame. He wasn't moving. He wasn't speaking. He was simply watching her. Anya felt a blush creep up her neck, hot and unwelcome. She was wearing her old, paint-splattered smock over her beige uniform, her hair a messy bun, a stray strand clinging to her cheek. She felt utterly exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see every frayed edge of her desperation, every moral compromise etched onto her soul. His eyes were the first thing she truly registered, a deep, fathomless green, not bright or sparkling, but intense, ancient, like polished jade. They held an unnerving stillness, a predatory calm that made her want to shrink into the very walls. "Good evening," Anya managed, her voice a reedy whisper, barely recognizable as her own. She tried to project an air of professional composure, but her hands, she knew, were trembling. She clutched her brush like a lifeline. "Can I help you?" Lorenzo's gaze drifted from her face, down her form, then to the Florentine Madonna on the easel. His eyes lingered on the tiny, almost invisible tear she was working on. He knew. Of course he knew. He was the owner. He had purchased this piece, likely in some clandestine transaction that bypassed the official channels. The realization deepened her unease. He took a single, deliberate step into the room, then another. The sound of his expensive leather shoes on the polished concrete floor was unnervingly soft, almost silent, belying the sheer weight and power of the man. He wasn't overtly threatening, yet every instinct in Anya screamed danger. This was a man used to getting what he wanted, a man whose commands were obeyed without question, often without being uttered aloud. He stopped a few feet from the easel, close enough for Anya to catch the subtle, sophisticated scent of his cologne, a woody, citrusy fragrance that spoke of wealth and understated dominance. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, and Anya's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. What was he doing? With a smooth, unhurried motion, he pulled out a thick, black envelope. Not a credit card, but crisp, untouched banknotes, bound together with a simple silver clip. He placed it carefully on the edge of her workbench, next to her solvents and brushes. It landed with a soft, almost soundless thud, yet the impact felt deafening in the sudden, electric silence of the room. "For your Discretion, Lorenzo said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air. It wasn't a question, nor a request. It was a statement of fact, an implicit acknowledgement to the shady dealings she was entangled in, and a subtle assertion of his involvement. He knew about Silas, about her situation, about the dirty work. He knew everything. Anya stared at the envelope, then back at him, her mind reeling. The sheer audacity, the quiet, effortless display of power. He wasn't just observing. He was buying her silence, her loyalty, her very complicity in whatever dark world he inhabited. The money, a fortune by her standards, felt like a heavy, golden chain being fastened around her. Ah, I don't understand, Anya stammered, her voice thin and weak. She tried to push the envelope away, but her hand felt rooted to the spot. The cold reality of the situation began to sink in, chilling her to the bone. He wasn't just a rich collector. He was something far more dangerous, far more controlling. Lorenzo's green eyes narrowed, fixing on hers. There was a spark in their depths now, not anger, but a possessive curiosity, like a predator assessing its chosen prey. He took another step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to instinctively take a small step back, bumping lightly against the easel. "You understand perfectly," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, intimate and dangerously compelling. "You fix what needs fixing. You ensure no one else touches what is mine. And in return, you will find your troubles disappear." His gaze dropped to her trembling hands, then swept over the Florentine Madonna, a silent claim on both the art and the artist. The implication was clear. He owned the painting, and by extension, he now owned the hands that worked on it and the person connected to those hands. A spark ignited within Anya, not of fear alone, but of a dangerous, unsettling defiance. Or perhaps it was the first flicker of a dark attraction she didn't want to name. She should be furious, insulted, terrified. And she was all of those things. But beneath it all, a strange, electric current coursed through her, a perverse thrill at being seen, truly seen, by a man of such undeniable power. He wasn't dismissive or condescending like Silas. He was interested. And that, in its own terrifying way, was more seductive than any sweet lie. He leaned in slightly, the scent of his cologne enveloping her, a luxurious cage. "You have a gift, Anya Petrova," he murmured, his voice a silken thread, "and I intend to make sure nothing interferes with it." His eyes held hers, a silent, powerful challenge, a promise of both protection and absolute dominion. Anya felt a shiver trace its way down her spine. The world outside the studio faded, leaving only her, the painting, and the man who had just silently laid claim to her. He was a predator, and she, a fragile moth, was caught in his orbit, drawn by a light that promised both salvation and consumption. She knew with chilling certainty that her quiet life was over. The game had just begun, and she was already a piece on his chessboard. She stared at the black envelope, then at his unreadable face, her mind racing. What would this man ask of her next? And how far would she let him take her? The summons came, not as a polite request, but a terse command delivered by Silas Blackwood's stony-faced personal assistant. "Mr. Blackwood requires your presence, Miss Petrova." Immediately, the words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken authority, like a guillotine blade suspended by a thread. Anya's heart plunged, a cold stone in her chest. She knew this moment was inevitable, a dark inevitability she'd been dreading since the encounter with Lorenzo Moretti. Her feet felt like lead as she walked through the gleaming corridors of Blackwood Auction House, each step a reluctant march toward her own condemnation. Silas Blackwood's office was a meticulously curated mausoleum of power. Dark, polished mahogany gleamed under recessed lighting, reflecting the cold, calculating glint in Silas's eyes. Walls were adorned with genuine masterpieces, authenticated, unlike the one he was forcing her to manipulate. The air, thick with the scent of expensive cigar smoke and old money, felt suffocating. Silas sat behind a massive desk, a monument to his ego, his fingers steepled, his gaze unblinking as Anya entered. He didn't offer her a seat. He rarely did, a subtle power play that always left her feeling physically smaller, more vulnerable. Anya, Silas began, his voice a low, even purr that was infinitely more menacing than any shout. The Florentine Madonna. A delightful piece. A private acquisition, of course. He paused, letting the words hang, a silent reminder of the shadowy dealings that underpinned his empire. However, the documentation, the provenance, is lacking. A small oversight, easily rectified by someone with your unique talents. Anya swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. Mr. Blackwood, to alter provenance, is an act of artistry. He cut her off, his smile thin and chilling. To weave a believable history, to make the impossible plausible. You are an artist, Anya. Do not deny your true calling. He leaned back, his gaze sweeping over her, an unsettling mixture of appraisal and contempt. But we have a more pressing matter. The Van Meer painting. A stunning piece, is it not? Her blood ran cold. The Van Meer. A masterpiece rumored to be lost, its authenticity debated for decades. The one that surfaced in Geneva last month. Precisely, Silas purred, enjoying her discomfort. And it requires a definitive signature. One that cements its value, its authenticity. Your hand, Anya, is uniquely suited for such delicate work. Her hands, the very instruments of her passion, felt soiled just at the thought. To forge a signature on a canvas that was, by all accounts, likely a brilliant fake, was to betray everything she believed in. I can't, she whispered, shaking her head. I won't. Silas's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened, becoming two chips of glacial ice. You forget your position, Miss Petrova. You are an employee. More than that, you are indebted. Deeply indebted. That charming little antique shop of your father's, it has rather substantial liabilities, wouldn't you agree? The mention of the shop of her father was a physical blow. Anya gasped, her breath catching. You wouldn't. Oh, but I would, Silas said, his voice still soft, but laced with a threat so potent it made her teeth ache. Your father's failing health, his dwindling memory, a perfectly opportune time for a thorough investigation into his books. Perhaps some of those antiques have a rather unfortunate history of ownership. Stolen goods, perhaps? A simple rumor, Anya, a whisper in the right ears, and not only will Petrova antiques be seized, but your father's good name will be dragged through the mud. And yours, of course. Your career, your reputation, your very livelihood, gone. Utterly devastated. The words were a physical assault, punching the air from her lungs. Anya felt a dizzying wave of nausea. Her vision blurred, the opulent office tilting precariously. She clutched the back of an ornate chair, her knuckles white. Silas had her. He had her cornered, and she was utterly powerless. The golden chains of his wealth and influence were now wrapped around her, binding her tighter than any physical restraint. What do you want me to do? She choked out, the bitter taste of defeat filling her mouth. Silas's smile widened, a triumphant, predatory flash. Exactly what you were hired for, Anya. Preserve the art, authenticate its history, and ensure its value remains unquestioned. He pushed a folder across the desk. The details are inside. Consider it done by Friday. Dismissed. Anya stumbled out of his office, the heavy door clicking shut behind her like a tomb. Her mind was a whirlwind of frantic, desperate thoughts. She spent the next few days in a blur of panicked research, holed up in dusty law libraries, making discreet calls to acquaintances in the art world, trying to find an escape. Every conversation ended the same way, a cautious, whispered warning about Silas Blackwood, a swift hang-up, or a polite refusal to get involved. He was too powerful, too connected. No one dared cross him. Even her attempts to reach out to Detective Cole, the officer Lorenzo had mentioned, proved futile. His office was a maze of bureaucracy, and her vague, fear-ridden pleas were met with polite skepticism. Unless you have concrete evidence, Miss Petrova, we can't act on rumors. But how could she get evidence without exposing herself and her family to ruin? She visited her father at the shop. Its familiar scent of old paper, wood polish, and faded memories, usually a comfort, now felt like a constant ache. He sat amidst his beloved collection, his eyes distant, his hands trembling as he polished a chipped porcelain doll. The sight of him, so vulnerable, solidified her resolve, even as it deepened her despair. She had to protect him, no matter the cost to her soul. During these agonizing days, Lorenzo Moretti's presence became a subtle, unnerving hum beneath the surface of her life. He didn't approach her in public. He didn't speak. But Anya felt his eyes on her whenever she was at Blackwood, a piercing emerald gaze that seemed to strip away her defenses, laying bare her fear and her fractured resolve. She'd catch glimpses of his black, imposing car parked discreetly down the street from the auction house, or notice him observing a new exhibition, always with an unnerving stillness. Then the gifts began to arrive. Not at her small, humble apartment, but discreetly left for her at Blackwood's reception, marked simply AP. One morning, it was a leather-bound journal, filled with blank, aged paper, an exact replica of the sketchbooks revered by Renaissance masters, something she had once admired in a museum. The next, a rare, incredibly delicate set of antique miniature brushes, each hair as fine as a whisper. Another time, a small, unmarked box containing fragments of lapis lazuli, raw and exquisite, the very pigment prized by old masters. Each gift was anonymous, yet Anya knew. She knew it was from him. The gifts were unsettling, intrusive, a stark reminder of his pervasive reach. But they were also deeply personal. He understood her craft, her passion, in a way Silas never could. He saw the artist in her, not just the tool. And that twisted, dark understanding both repelled and drew her in. She would find herself tracing the fine hairs of the brushes, inhaling the almost metallic scent of the lapis, feeling a dangerous, forbidden flicker of gratitude, even appreciation. She was caught. A pawn in a game she didn't understand, trapped between Silas Blackwood's explicit threats and Lorenzo Moretti's silent, possessive claims. Silas was the immediate, visible danger, pushing her towards the abyss of moral degradation. But Lorenzo was a deeper, more profound threat, a shadow wrapping around her, offering protection at the cost of her very autonomy. His gifts, those beautiful, valuable tokens of his dangerous interest, were not gifts at all. They were just more links in the golden chains, binding her ever tighter to his dark, undeniable will. The Friday deadline loomed. Anya sat alone in room 3B, the forged signature now a grotesque reality on the Van Meer painting's corner. The Florentine Madonna, its tear now seamlessly restored, seemed to weep for her lost innocence. She was no longer just an artisan. She was a conspirator, her soul stained. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Silas Blackwood wouldn't stop here. He would demand more. And Lorenzo, the dark patron who understood her secrets, would be watching, always watching. A profound sense of dread settled over her, chilling her to the marrow. The next move, she sensed, would not be hers. It would be Silas's, or perhaps even more terrifyingly Lorenzo's. The metallic tang of the forgery still clung to Anya's fingertips, a phantom stain that no amount of scrubbing could erase. The Van Meer painting, with its newly authenticated signature, was now nestled in a private vault, ready for its illicit journey. A profound emptiness had settled in Anya's chest, a dull ache where her artistic integrity once resided. She had done it. Her father's shop was safe for now, the specter of ruin temporarily banished. But the cost to her soul felt immeasurable. Yet, a strange, unsettling paradox had begun to emerge. The crushing weight of Silas's blackmail was still present, a suffocating blanket woven with threats and coercion. But now, it was subtly counterbalanced by the omnipresent, silent weight of Lorenzo Moretti. His presence, palpable hum beneath the surface of her new compromised reality, was both the threat and a peculiar form of solace. She moved through the halls of Blackwood like a sleepwalker, her eyes constantly scanning, her senses hyper-alert. She never saw him approach directly. He simply was. A fleeting glimpse of his black, imposing SUV gliding past the auction house windows. A shadow flickering at the end of a corridor, too tall, too broad to be anyone else. The faint, expensive scent of his cologne lingering near the newly acquired Florentine Madonna, now perfectly restored, its tear an erased memory. He was a silent sentinel, always watching, always near. And with each fleeting sign of his proximity, Anya's heart would leap, a frantic, confused beat that was part fear, part a dangerous, unfamiliar anticipation. One afternoon, as she painstakingly cataloged a collection of ancient coins in the hushed, climate-controlled archives, she heard a soft, almost imperceptible click. The heavy door, usually secured, had been left slightly ajar. She looked up. Standing in the doorway, framed by the dim light of the corridor, was Lorenzo. He didn't enter. He simply stood, a dark, imposing figure, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his tailored trousers. His green eyes, sharp as emerald chips, met hers across the rows of dusty shelves. Anya's breath hitched. She felt a sudden electric tension snap between them, a silent current that crackled in the stale air. He wasn't smiling, wasn't frowning. His expression was unreadable, a perfectly sculpted mask of calm power. But in his eyes, she saw it, that proprietary gleam, that unsettling blend of curiosity and absolute claim. He was assessing her, absorbing her, as if she were another priceless acquisition to be cataloged and understood. "Miss Petrova," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that seemed to ripple through her very bones. It was the first time he'd used her surname, and it felt oddly intimate, a formal address imbued with an informal possessiveness. Still tending to forgotten histories, Anya clutched an antique Roman coin in her hand, its cold metal a grounding sensation against her trembling fingers. "Someone has to," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. She hated how easily he could disarm her, how his mere presence could send her pulse racing. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. "Indeed, a noble pursuit. Though some histories are better left forgotten, wouldn't you agree?" His gaze, still locked with hers, held a knowing glint, a clear reference to the Van Meer and her unwilling complicity. It was a silent acknowledgement of her secret, and with it, a tacit promise of his protection. Or his complicity. The line blurred, dangerously. He held her gaze for what felt like an eternity, the silence stretching taut, filled with unspoken words and raw, undeniable chemistry. Anya felt a blush creep up her neck. She wanted to look away, to break the potent connection, but found herself utterly unable. It was like staring into the sun. Painful, yet mesmerizing. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned, his dark silhouette vanishing down the corridor, leaving only the lingering scent of his cologne and a profound sense of disorientation in his wake. The heavy door clicked shut, plunging the archives back into a comforting, yet now lonely silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quiet dignity of the ancient objects surrounding her. What was that? She wondered, pressing a cool hand to her flushed cheek. He was dangerous. He was manipulative. He was a man who pulled strings from the shadows, a man whose hands were undoubtedly stained by deeds far darker than hers. Yet when he looked at her, truly looked, she felt something stir within her, a spark of something forbidden, something that whispered of safety in the eye of the storm. The subtle acts of his care extended beyond the walls of Blackwood. Anya began to notice things around her father's antique shop. Mr. Henderson, the gruff baker from 2 doors down, would occasionally nod towards a dark, unassuming sedan parked a block away. New faces around him. Professional types. Good for business, I reckon. Less unwanted attention. Anya had initially dismissed it, but then she recognized one of the men, a stoic, broad-shouldered figure she'd seen occasionally near Lorenzo at the auction house. He was always subtly present, always watching. A sense of profound unease, intertwined with an almost shameful relief, washed over her. Lorenzo wasn't just watching her, he was watching her family. He had extended his golden chains of protection to her aging father, to their struggling shop. The thought of it was both terrifying and incredibly seductive. She was losing her autonomy piece by piece, but in return, she was gaining a security she hadn't known existed. The fear of Silas Blackwood, though still a cold knot in her stomach, now felt less immediate, less paralyzing. Then came the anonymous package, delivered directly to her small apartment rather than Blackwood. It was a rare, first-edition book on Flemish painting restoration, a volume she had only ever seen referenced in academic texts, its pages filled with intricate diagrams and forgotten techniques. A handwritten note, elegant and concise, was tucked inside for the true artist. No signature. None needed. Anya traced the delicate script, her fingers trembling. He knew her deepest desires, her quiet passions. He saw the artist within her, not just the restorer or the blackmailed pawn. He nourished that part of her, even as he pulled her deeper into his dangerous world. The book, a priceless treasure, felt like another link in the chain, another layer of his silent, pervasive control. She spent hours poring over its pages, feeling a profound sense of gratitude, mixed with a growing, dangerous attraction. He was an enigma, a dark force that offered both destruction and salvation. The internal conflict raged within her. Every logical fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to sever all ties with this dangerous, possessive man. He was a criminal, a shadow lord who wielded power with ruthless efficiency. His world was not hers. Yet a deeper, more primal part of her, bruised and battered by years of struggle and vulnerability, craved the absolute security he offered. When he was near, when his emerald eyes met hers, when his unspoken protection wrapped around her, she felt safe. And for a woman who had spent her entire life walking on a tightrope, that feeling was a potent, addictive poison. She found herself thinking of him, not just with fear, but with a strange, burgeoning curiosity. What lay beneath that perfectly composed exterior? What secrets did those ancient green eyes hold? And how far was he willing to go to protect what he now, clearly, considered his? The truth was, the distinction between being protected and being controlled had begun to blur. She was no longer just Anya Petrova, the struggling art restorer. She was Anya Petrova, the woman claimed by Lorenzo Moretti. And as the days bled into weeks, the whispers of his power, the soft rustle of his expensive gifts, and the intense heat of his silent gaze began to etch themselves onto the canvas of her life, reshaping it irrevocably. She was a fading masterpiece, being meticulously, possessively restored by a very dangerous hand. One evening, as she was leaving Blackwood, the city lights painting long streaks across the wet pavement, a chilling thought struck her. Silas Blackwood had been unusually quiet since the Van Meer. Too quiet. A cold dread, sharper than usual, pricked her skin. It felt like the calm before a storm. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the next move would not be from Lorenzo, nor from her. It would be Silas, and it would be far more sinister than anything she had faced before. The unspoken truce, she sensed, was about to break, and when it did, she would be caught unequivocally in the crossfire. There in the private gallery of Blackwood Auction House, hummed with a different kind of tension than usual. It was the night of the exclusive internal exhibition, a showcase of recently restored and acquired pieces before their public unveiling or private sale. Anya moved amongst the small, elite crowd, a ghost in her own skin. Her official task was to answer questions about the restoration techniques, her trained eye flitting over each canvas, seeking flaws, while her mind replayed the damning act of forgery. The polished smiles and polite murmurs of the collectors, all oblivious to the rot beneath the gilded surface, felt like a judgment. She wore a simple black dress, a uniform of anonymity amidst the glittering gowns and bespoke suits. Her heart, however, was a frantic drum against her ribs. She hadn't seen Silas since the dreadful meeting, but she felt his presence like a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. He moved through the crowd, a sleek predator in his element, his eyes sweeping over the guests, occasionally flicking towards her with a chilling, possessive amusement. He hadn't directly thanked her for the Van Meer, but his satisfied smirk had been acknowledgement enough. Tonight, the centerpiece of the exhibition was a small, delicate portrait. The lady with the emerald brooch, a fragile 17th century oil painting that Anya had painstakingly stabilized over weeks. She had loved its quiet dignity, its subtle brushstrokes, the way the artist had captured a fleeting sadness in the lady's eyes. It was a piece she had poured her genuine artistry into, a balm for her recently tarnished soul. As she stood near it, explaining the intricate process of consolidations and relining to a small group of potential buyers, a subtle disturbance rippled through the gallery. A hush fell, then a strained cough. Anya turned, her breath catching in her throat. Silas Blackwood stood directly in front of the lady with the emerald brooch, his hand resting, almost casually, on the ornate velvet rope that cordoned off the display. His gaze was fixed on the painting, a look of faux concern etched onto his features. "An exquisite piece, Miss Petrova," he announced, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "Your work on its restoration is, as always, commendable." Anya felt a surge of professional pride, quickly followed by a cold dread. Nothing Silas did was without an ulterior motive. However, he continued, his voice dropping slightly, one must always be meticulous with these fragile beauties. A single, unseen fault can lead to unfortunate incidents. As he spoke, his hand, still resting on the rope, gave a barely perceptible tug. It wasn't enough to break the rope, but Anya's artist's eye, honed to spot the most minute imperfections, noticed it immediately. The display stand, designed to hold the painting securely, shifted. A barely visible crack, likely pre-made or deliberately weakened, spiderwebbed across the delicate plaster of the stand. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. The lady with the emerald brooch, moments ago standing proud, now leaned precariously, threatening to topple from its easel. A woman in a pearl necklace shrieked. Chaos, contained and elegant, erupted. Anya's blood ran cold. She knew, with sickening certainty, what was happening. This wasn't an accident. This was Silas. A calculated move to publicly discredit her, to remind her, and perhaps others, of his absolute power, of how easily he could orchestrate her downfall. Her stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. Her hard work, her genuine passion, was about to be shattered, literally, before her eyes. The humiliation would be devastating, echoing through the tight-knit art world. "Oh dear," Silas said, his voice laced with feigned regret, yet his eyes, when they met Anya's, held a triumphant, cruel glint. "It seems even the most talented hands can miss a structural weakness." "Perhaps a lapse in judgment, Miss Petrova." Anya felt a fiery flush creep up her neck. Anger, hot and righteous, flared through her veins, momentarily eclipsing the fear. How dare he? How dare he use her own work, her own integrity, against her like this? She opened her mouth to protest, to expose his malicious act, but no words came. Her throat felt constricted, her voice stolen by the sheer, overwhelming injustice. She felt all eyes on her, accusing, judging. The whispers began, soft but sharp, like shards of glass. Careless, unprofessional, ashamed. Then a sudden stillness permeated the room, a quietude so profound it seemed to suck the very air out of the bustling gallery. Anya felt it before she saw it. A presence, dark and formidable, moving with a silent, lethal grace through the parting crowd. Lorenzo Moretti. He emerged from the shadows near the entrance, a stark silhouette against the warm glow of the chandeliers. He was dressed in a dark, charcoal suit, impeccably tailored, making him look less like a guest and more like a king surveying his dominion. His gaze, colder and sharper than any emerald, cut directly through the room, past Silas, past the teetering painting, and locked onto Anya. In that instant, she felt the strange mix of terror and an almost desperate hope. His eyes, usually unreadable, now held a dangerous, possessive fury that sent a shiver down her spine. He knew. He saw everything. He didn't rush. He walked with a deliberate, unhurried pace, his imposing frame drawing every eye, every breath. As he approached, a heavy, silent man in a dark suit, who Anya recognized as one of Lorenzo's personal guards, moved swiftly, almost imperceptibly, towards the unstable display. With a practiced, deft motion, he stabilized the easel, securing the painting just before it could fall, his movements so smooth they seemed almost choreographed. The collective sigh of relief from the crowd was audible. Lorenzo stopped directly in front of Silas, effectively eclipsing him, his height and sheer presence dwarfing the auction house owner. Their eyes met, a silent battle of wills playing out in the tense space. Lorenzo didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He simply leaned in slightly, his lips moving in a low, almost inaudible whisper that only Silas could hear. But the effect was immediate, devastating. Silas Blackwood's smug, triumphant expression crumbled. His face paled, a flicker of genuine fear passing through his cold eyes. He recoiled slightly, as if struck. Whatever Lorenzo had whispered, it had landed with the force of a physical blow. Lorenzo then straightened, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, a silent, powerful warning. Such exquisite art, he stated, his voice calm, yet carrying an undeniable authority that silenced all lingering whispers. It would be a tragedy to see it damaged by a carelessness. His eyes flickered to Silas, a clear, unmistakable implication. Perhaps a review of the exhibition's structural integrity is in order, Mr. Blackwood? For future events. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Silas, still pale, managed a weak, forced smile. Indeed, Mr. Moretti. An excellent suggestion. We shall see to it immediately. He even nodded, a gesture of deference that Anya had never witnessed him offer to anyone. Silas, the untouchable, the ruthless, had just been publicly, unequivocally, put in his place. Lorenzo then turned, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as it settled on Anya. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a flash of understanding, a dangerous alliance. He had saved her, not with words of comfort, but with a display of raw, undeniable power that left her breathless. The public embarrassment had been averted, her reputation salvaged, but at what cost? Relief washed over her, so potent it made her knees weak. But beneath it, a more complex, unsettling emotion stirred. She had witnessed the true extent of Lorenzo's reach, his swift and decisive ability to manipulate, to control, to utterly dominate any situation. He had claimed her, publicly, silently. He had shown her, and Silas, that she was his to protect. And in that terrifying, exhilarating moment, Anya realized the golden chains were tightening, not just around her circumstances, but around her very soul. She was irrevocably tied to this dangerous man, a piece in his elaborate, brutal game. And Silas, though retreating for now, wouldn't forget this humiliation. This was just the beginning of the real war, and she was undeniably the prize. The aftermath of the internal exhibition still buzzed in Anya's mind like an insistent, unsettling hum. Silas Blackwood's calculated attempt to publicly shame her had backfired spectacularly, thanks to Lorenzo Moretti's swift and silent intervention. The whispers among the staff now centered not on Anya's supposed carelessness, but on Silas's sudden, uncharacteristic deference to the enigmatic Mr. Moretti. Anya knew what had truly transpired, and the memory of Lorenzo's dark, furious eyes, the possessive glint in them as he claimed her protection, sent a shiver down her spine, a thrill laced with profound unease. Her father's shop was still safe, the looming threats from Silas temporarily subdued. She'd noticed the discreet black sedan, always a block away, its occupants blending into the urban landscape, yet their presence was a constant, tangible reminder of Lorenzo's reach. It was a gilded cage, she knew, but for the first time in years, the constant, gnawing fear for her family had receded, replaced by a different kind of apprehension, one that revolved entirely around him. Anya found herself working late again, a few nights after the incident. She was in the smaller, less-used archive room, meticulously documenting a new acquisition of antique etchings. The work was precise, solitary, a balm for her overstimulated nerves. The soft rustle of aged paper against her fingertips, the faint scent of ink and history, usually provided a comforting solitude. But tonight, a restlessness gnawed at her. Her thoughts drifted, unbidden, to Lorenzo, to his intensity, to the unspoken power that emanated from him like a physical force. She found herself wondering about the man behind the terrifying reputation, the enigma cloaked in bespoke suits. What drove him? What did he truly feel? The archive room was adjacent to one of Blackwood's private viewing chambers, a secluded space where high-value clients could examine acquisitions in absolute privacy. Usually, it remained locked. But tonight, a sliver of light escaped from under the heavy oak door, and she could hear the low murmur of a voice, speaking rapidly, intently, in a language she didn't quite recognize, yet it resonated with a primal intensity. Italian. Lorenzo. Anya froze, her hand hovering over a delicate etching. She shouldn't listen. It was an invasion of his privacy, a dangerous peek behind the impenetrable curtain he maintained. But curiosity, sharp and insistent, coiled in her gut. She couldn't move. The voice was unmistakably Lorenzo's, stripped of its usual calm, even dangerous composure. It was raw, edged with a frustration she hadn't known he possessed, a deep guttural tone that spoke of profound anger, perhaps even pain. He wasn't giving orders, he was pleading, or perhaps begging. But it wasn't for himself. The words, though foreign, carried a universal cadence of anguish. Non ancora, devi trovare, like per me, per nostra madre? Her understanding was rudimentary, pieced together from a few overheard phrases in documentaries, but the urgency, the desperate plea, was unmistakable. Not yet. You must find her for me, for our mother. A frantic search. A missing woman. His mother. The thought sent a jolt through her. Then a sudden sharp crack, like bone against marble. A small, violent sound that startled Anya, making her flinch. The voice stopped. Silence, heavy and absolute, descended. Anya's heart pounded. She imagined him, alone in that room, the polished surfaces reflecting his pain, the powerful facade momentarily shattered. The image was unsettling, disorienting. This wasn't the cold, calculating mafia boss. This was a man, suffering, vulnerable. A moment later, the private viewing room door creaked open, and Lorenzo emerged. He didn't see her at first. His back was to her, his shoulders hunched, his perfectly tailored jacket slightly disheveled. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of raw frustration. As he turned, his profile was illuminated by the faint ambient light. His jaw was clenched, a muscle working furiously. And etched on his face, momentarily stripped of its usual control, was a profound, aching weariness. His eyes, usually sharp and piercing, were clouded with a deep-seated sorrow, a haunted look that sent a pang of unexpected empathy through Anya. She saw for the first time, not the predator, but the burdened man. Then his gaze flickered, sensing her presence. His head snapped up, his eyes locking onto hers. For a fraction of a second, that raw vulnerability remained, exposed, before his usual mask of cold control slammed back into place, harder, faster than before. A flicker of something akin to shame, or perhaps fierce privacy, passed through his green eyes. "Miss Petrova," he said, his voice now flat, devoid of emotion, yet still holding that low rumble that resonated in her chest. "Working late." It was a statement, not a question, a subtle warning against her accidental eavesdropping. Anya felt a blush creep up her neck. "Mr. Moretti," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. She looked down at the etchings, pretending a sudden interest. "Ah, I was just about finished." He walked towards her, his footsteps, usually silent, now slightly heavier, as if the weight of the world pressed down on him. He stopped a few feet away, his presence imposing, but for the first time, not entirely threatening. The raw emotion she had glimpsed had changed something, shifting the dynamic between them. "You heard," he stated, his voice devoid of accusation, just a simple, unvarnished fact. Anya swallowed, her gaze still fixed on the etchings. "Only fragments." "I didn't mean to pry, Mr. Moretti." Lorenzo, he corrected, his voice softer than before, an unexpected intimacy in the single word. My name is Lorenzo. He paused, and she felt his eyes burning into her, demanding she meet his gaze. Slowly, she looked up. His eyes, though still guarded, held a different quality now, a weary honesty. My sister. She has disappeared. A long time ago. His voice was low, almost a confession. After my father died. Violently. Because he trusted the wrong people. He made us soft. My mother never recovered. Anya listened, stunned. The cold, ruthless mafia boss, opening up to her, a vulnerable confession about a profound family tragedy. It explained so much. His need for control. His constant vigilance. His absolute, unwavering demand for loyalty. His world was built on loss, on betrayal, on a constant battle for survival. I'm so sorry, Lorenzo, she said, her voice filled with genuine empathy. The words felt inadequate, hollow in the face of such deep-seated pain. He gave a wry, humorless smile. Sorry is a luxury I cannot afford. In my world, regret is a weakness. Control is survival. Protection is paramount. His eyes met hers, and in their emerald depth, she saw the unspoken question. Do you understand now? Is that why you do what you do? She asked, her voice hushed. Protect what's yours? Because you've lost so much. He nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his head. When you build an empire on blood and loyalty, you learn quickly that the only things truly safe are those you hold closest. Those you claim. His gaze intensified, turning possessive, unmistakable. You see something pure in a dirty city, Anya, and you do not let anyone touch it. Ever. Not again. The air crackled between them, thick with shared vulnerability and a dangerous, deepening connection. Anya felt a profound shift in her perception of him. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man forged in fire, burdened by a past that demanded ruthless vigilance. And in that moment, she understood, truly understood, the why behind his golden chains. He wasn't just controlling her. He was terrified of losing her, of failing to protect her, just as he had failed to protect his sister. He lifted his hand, slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to flinch, to pull away. She didn't. Her breath hitched in her throat as his fingers, strong and warm, gently cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed softly over her skin, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down her spine. It was a gesture of such unexpected tenderness, so out of place for the man he was, yet so utterly real. You see me, he murmured, his voice husky, his green eyes boring into hers, searching, demanding. More than anyone in a long time. Anya leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a brief moment, savoring the warmth, the unexpected comfort. I do, she whispered, her heart aching with a complex mix of fear, empathy, and a burgeoning, undeniable desire. He leaned closer, his scent enveloping her. Expensive cologne, a faint hint of old leather, and something else, something uniquely him, a raw, masculine scent that spoke of power and danger. His lips, warm and soft, brushed against hers. Not a demanding kiss, not possessive, but a gentle inquiry, a shared secret. It was a kiss of understanding, of shared burdens, a silent acknowledgement of the dangerous, magnetic pull that had grown between them. Anya felt a jolt of electricity, a spark that ignited a fire deep within her. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her lips. This, he murmured, his voice low and ragged, is why I cannot let you go. This is why you are mine. Anya's eyes fluttered open. She looked into his, seeing not just the mafia boss, but the man wounded and complex who had offered her the most dangerous, yet most profound, form of protection. But as their eyes locked, a sudden, sharp tremor vibrated through the floorboards. A distant, muffled boom echoed through the quiet building, followed by the faint wail of an alarm. Lorenzo's eyes snapped open, instantly hardening, the mask of control falling back into place with chilling speed. The tenderness vanished, replaced by a ruthless alertness. What was that? Anya whispered, her heart pounding with a renewed primal fear. Lorenzo straightened, his hand dropping from her face, his jaw tight. Stay here. Don't move. He turned, his movements swift and lethal, already pulling out his phone. Vince, he barked into the receiver, his voice cold steel. Report. Now. The fragile moment of intimacy shattered, replaced by the jarring reality of his world. Anya stood alone in the archive, trembling, the echo of his kiss still on her lips, but her mind now consumed by a terrifying question. What fresh hell had just erupted, and how close was it to them? The distant boom and the wail of the alarm from a few nights prior had been swiftly contained. Lorenzo's men, a silent, efficient force, had moved with chilling precision, and within minutes, the source of the disturbance, a minor break-in attempt at a neighboring gallery, swiftly foiled, was dismissed as an isolated incident. Yet, the air in Blackwood Auction House had remained charged, a palpable unease lingering beneath the veneer of normalcy. Anya knew, instinctively, that it was a test. Probing. And Silas Blackwood was behind it, an insatiable shark circling for an opening. The intimacy she had shared with Lorenzo, the unexpected glimpse into his burdened soul, felt like a distant dream, a fragile memory eclipsed by the escalating tension. He had resumed his watchful distance, his presence a constant, silent pressure. Anya, too, had retreated, consumed by a gnawing sense of dread. The Florentine Madonna and the Van Meer painting now seemed like trophies of her lost innocence, mocking her from their secure vaults. Tonight was the night of Silas Blackwood's most exclusive private auction, an event so secretive, so elite, that invitations were whispered, not printed. It was held in a discreet, heavily secured annex of the main building, far from prying eyes. Only the wealthiest, the most influential collectors, and those with connections to Silas's shadowy network were present. Anya, ironically, was required to be there, not as an invited guest, but as the chief restorer, her presence a final, cruel act in Silas's meticulously crafted play. She wore a simple, professional black pantsuit, designed to be unobtrusive, but tonight it felt like a target. The annex gleamed with polished chrome and subdued lighting, showcasing a selection of high-value pieces, each accompanied by its own discreet security detail. The air was thick with the scent of money, ambition, and the faint, almost imperceptible tang of fear. Anya felt a profound sense of isolation, a chilling premonition of what was to come. She had seen Silas earlier, his smile a thin, predatory line, his eyes burning with cruel anticipation that made her stomach churn. He had something planned, something irreversible. As the evening progressed, the auction moved with stately, unhurried grace. Rare artifacts found new owners. Millions changed hands with quiet nods. Anya stood near the back, an invisible observer, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She kept scanning the room, a desperate, almost pathetic hope flickering within her. Would Lorenzo be here? Would he sense the coming storm? Or was she truly, utterly alone? Suddenly, Silas Blackwood stepped onto a raised platform at the front of the annex. The murmurs died down, replaced by a respectful, expectant silence. Silas, impeccably dressed, exuded an aura of confident, ruthless charm. Distinguished guest, he began, his voice smooth and resonant. Tonight, we have witnessed the exchange of unparalleled beauty and history. But as stewards of art, we also bear a solemn responsibility. A responsibility to truth, to authenticity. Anya felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Her breath hitched. This was it. The trap was springing. It has come to my attention, Silas continued, his voice now imbued with a faint gravity, that some unethical practices have regrettably tainted the sacred halls of our restoration department. A betrayal of trust. A forgery of the most egregious kind. His eyes, like a viper's, darted to Anya, a quick, almost imperceptible flick that held a universe of malice. A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. Whispers erupted, hushed yet venomous. Anya felt all eyes turn to her, sharp and accusing. Her blood ran cold. The walls of the annex seemed to close in, the air growing impossibly thin. Tonight, Silas announced, his voice rising, resonating with righteous indignation. I'm forced to expose a deception that threatens to undermine the very integrity of the art world. A deception perpetrated by one of our own. He gestured dramatically towards a large, veiled easel at the side of the platform. This piece, a masterpiece of the Impressionist era, was recently authenticated and valued at over $50 million. However, upon closer, entirely independent inspection, he paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension build to an unbearable crescendo. Anya's hands trembled, her entire body rigid with terror. She knew this painting. It was a newly acquired Monet, believed to be one of his early, lesser-known works. Silas had tasked her with verifying its authenticity, a task she had, under immense duress, completed just days ago. The subtle changes she had made, the aged patina she had carefully applied to obscure certain modern pigment traces, the intricate provenance documents she had helped reconstruct, it all came flooding back, a tidal wave of incriminating details. It has been discovered, Silas continued, his voice dripping with false sorrow, that this painting, despite its initial promise, is a brilliantly executed forgery. He pulled the velvet veil away from the easel with a flourish. The Monet, its vibrant colors ironically mocking her despair, was revealed. Then his gaze locked onto Anya, his smile a cruel, victorious slash. And the culprit, the artist behind this egregious betrayal of trust, is none other than Miss Anya Petrova, our esteemed chief restorer. Anya felt the world tilt on its axis. A wave of nauseating public shame washed over her, so potent it made her knees buckle. The gallery erupted in a cacophony of gasps, angry murmurs, and outright denunciations. Faces, once politely curious, now contorted into expressions of disgust and outrage. She saw Detective Cole, the stern-faced officer Lorenzo had mentioned, standing near the back, his eyes fixed on her, cold and accusing. This was it. Her career, her reputation, her freedom, all of it gone. Devastated. Silas, basking in his moment of triumph, then brought forth a projector. We have undeniable proof, he declared, his voice booming across the stunned room. Fabricated restoration reports. Altered chemical analyses. And most damning of all, he clicked a button. On the screen, a magnified image appeared, her own meticulous, distinctive handwriting, subtly altered, but unmistakably hers, on a document detailing a fraudulent provenance. Then a chilling close-up, a tiny, almost invisible pigment unique to her personal kit, found near a forged signature on the Monet. And finally, a grainy, secretly recorded video clip from her restoration studio, showing her working late, her face contorted in concentration, then subtly altering a detail on the Monet's canvas. It was all a setup, flawlessly executed. The evidence, though manipulated, was damning. Anya stood frozen, a deer caught in headlights. Her mind screamed in protest, but no words would come. She wanted to explain, to expose Silas, but the weight of his threats against her father, against her shop, crushed her voice. She was utterly, completely helpless, abandoned. The humiliation was a physical pain, burning her from the inside out. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the faces of the accusing crowd, turning them into a monstrous, judgmental blur. She was alone, truly alone. Where was Lorenzo? The question screamed in her mind, a desperate, frantic plea. He had promised protection. He had claimed her. Had he abandoned her? Was his power, vast as it seemed, not enough to fight an enemy as entrenched, as cunning as Silas Blackwood? A bitter, icy despair seeped into her soul. She had been foolish to trust him, to let herself be drawn into his dangerous orbit. She was just another casualty in his world, a means to an end. Silas, savoring her public degradation, gestured to two security guards who began to move towards Anya, their faces grim. The heavy hand of the law, tainted by Silas's manipulations, was about to descend upon her. Anya closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable, for the cold touch of handcuffs, for the ruin of her life. The world spun. The murmurs of the crowd faded into a dull roar. This was the abyss. Her personal, professional, and moral destruction. But then a new sound cut through the din. Not a murmur, not a gasp, but a single, authoritative voice, low and resonant, yet carrying an undeniable weight that silenced the room more effectively than any gavel. Mr. Blackwood, the voice stated, calm and lethal, utterly devoid of emotion. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Anya's eyes snapped open. Her head shot up. Hope, fragile but fierce, flickered in her chest, a desperate ember in the ashes of her despair. The crowd parted, a silent, unwilling ocean, revealing a figure emerging from the shadows at the very back of the annex. Lorenzo. He was here. And in his eyes, a storm was brewing. A terrible, beautiful storm of fury and possessive protection. He hadn't abandoned her. He had merely been waiting for the perfect, most devastating moment to strike. And Anya knew, with a terrifying certainty, that Silas Blackwood was about to regret everything. The single calm statement from the back of the room cut through the cacophony like a perfectly honed blade. Mr. Blackwood, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Anya's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a desperate, impossible hope. The security guards, just inches from her, froze. The crowd, moments ago a ravenous pack, fell silent, their attention wrenched from Anya to the source of the voice. The sea of faces parted, revealing him. Lorenzo Moretti. He walked with an unhurried, almost regal stride, his dark, tailored suit a stark contrast to the pale, terrified faces he passed. Two of his formidable men, silent as specters, flanked him, their eyes scanning the room with ruthless efficiency. Lorenzo's gaze, colder and sharper than the emerald brooch on the Monet, found Anya's. In those green depths, she saw not judgment, but a terrifying possessive fury that sent a shiver, both of fear and desperate relief, through her. He hadn't abandoned her. He had simply been waiting for Silas to overplay his hand, to reveal the full extent of his depravity. Silas Blackwood, still on the platform, his smug triumph turning to a mask of bewildered alarm, stammered, Mr. Moretti? To what do we owe this interruption? His voice lacked its usual smooth arrogance, tinged now with a nascent fear. Lorenzo ignored him. He continued his slow, deliberate approach, his eyes never leaving Anya's. He stopped directly in front of her, his imposing figure a solid, impenetrable wall between her and the stunned, murmuring crowd. The world outside him ceased to exist. In his presence, Anya felt an immediate, profound sense of safety, even as a dangerous thrill coursed through her veins. He was here. He was truly here. Then his gaze shifted, turning to Silas on the platform. The change was instantaneous, chilling. The warmth, the subtle understanding in his eyes as he looked at Anya, vanished, replaced by an arctic contempt. A misunderstanding, Mr. Blackwood, Lorenzo repeated, his voice low, a dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. Regarding ownership, and regarding truth. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, not for a weapon, but for a sleek, expensive tablet. With a flick of his thumb, a holographic projection shimmered into existence, floating above the tablet's surface, visible to everyone in the room. The first image was a high-resolution scan of the Van Meer painting, the one Anya had been forced to authenticate. Next to it, another image appeared, a microphotography analysis revealing the modern pigments she had struggled to conceal. Then, a series of documents, their letterheads meticulously detailed, invoices for black market art supplies, banking records showing transfers to offshore accounts, and meticulously redacted emails outlining illegal transactions. Each piece of evidence was damning, meticulously organized, irrefutable. Silas's face went chalk white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. This is not a forgery, Mr. Blackwood, Lorenzo stated, his voice resonating with cold authority, his gaze still fixed on the holographic evidence. This is your forgery, orchestrated by you, enabled by you. and perpetrated with the intent to not only defraud your esteemed collectors, but to destroy an innocent woman. The crowd erupted in stunned murmurs, then gasps of outrage. Detective Cole, at the back, pulled out a notepad, his eyes fixed intently on the holographic display. Lorenzo then swiped the tablet. The display changed. Now, a series of grainy, yet unmistakably clear video clips played. Silas, in his office, explicitly threatening Anya, detailing the ruin of her father's shop. Silas, meeting with shady figures in dimly lit back rooms, discussing untraceable assets. Silas, even boasting about his control over his talented restorer. The final, most damning clip, Silas, himself, deliberately weakening the display stand for the lady with the emerald brooch just before the internal exhibition. Anya watched, horrified and mesmerized. He had known, all along. He had let Silas set the trap, not to ensnare her, but to expose himself. These are lies. Silas finally choked out, his voice hoarse, his face a mask of desperate denial. Fabricated. Blackmail. Lorenzo finally looked at Silas, his green eyes burning with a chilling intensity that promised slow, agonizing retribution. He took 2 steps, closing the distance between them, his towering presence dwarfing the older man. One of Lorenzo's men, with a subtle, fluid motion, stepped up onto the platform behind Silas, blocking his escape. Blackmail? Lorenzo's voice was a low growl, vibrating with controlled fury. You speak of blackmail, Silas? You, who traffics in stolen histories and preys on the desperate. You, who uses the vulnerable as pawns in your pathetic games. He paused, his gaze burning into Silas. This is not blackmail. This is justice. My justice. He then leaned in, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow, impossibly, carried to every terrified ear in the silent room. You soiled what was pure. You touched what was mine. And for that, Silas, you will lose everything. Your name, your fortune, your freedom. Consider your empire dismantled. Piece by agonizing piece. Silas flinched, his eyes wide with stark terror. The implied threat, the cold promise of utter ruin, was unmistakable. He knew what Lorenzo Moretti was, and he knew he was utterly, irrevocably defeated. Lorenzo then straightened, his gaze sweeping over the astonished faces of the collectors. This man, he declared, his voice resonating with absolute authority, is a fraud, a thief, and a threat to the integrity of art. He is no longer affiliated with Blackwood Auction House, nor with any other reputable institution. He then turned his full, searing attention back to Anya, his eyes softening, but with a new, fierce possessiveness. He stepped off the platform, walked back to her, and placed a firm, possessive hand on her arm. As for Miss Petrova, he stated, his voice a balm against her raw nerves, yet laced with an undeniable claim. She is an artist of unparalleled talent and integrity. She was coerced, forced into a situation by a man whose depravity knows no bounds. His gaze swept over the crowd, daring anyone to contradict him. Anything she has touched, anything she has worked on, any creation, any restoration, is of the highest quality. And from this moment forward, anything she creates, anything she breathes life into, any art she restores. He pulled her closer, his hand firm on her waist, his body a warm, solid anchor against her trembling form. His eyes, burning green, locked onto hers, a silent, powerful claim. The public declaration was for them, for the world, but the true message, the raw, possessive core of it, was for her. Is mine, he finished, his voice a low, intimate growl, his thumb stroking her hip in a possessive gesture that left no room for doubt. Her talent, her time, her safety, and her, all of it, mine. Anya felt a dizzying rush of emotions, intense fear, overwhelming relief, profound shock, and a dangerous, exhilarating sense of being utterly, completely claimed. He hadn't just saved her. He had obliterated her tormentor, publicly, decisively, with a display of power that was both terrifying and undeniably attractive. She was no longer just a struggling artist. She was his. And in that moment of utter vulnerability and exhilarating triumph, she knew, with chilling certainty, that she belonged to him now, completely and irrevocably. The golden chains had not only tightened, they had become an intrinsic part of her. Anya woke to a profound silence, a luxurious stillness utterly unlike the frantic pulse of her old life. For a moment, she was disoriented, a soft panic fluttering in her chest. The ceiling above was high, impossibly smooth, a canvas of creamy white. Sunlight, filtered through sheer, gossamer curtains, bathed the expansive room in a gentle, ethereal glow. The air smelled of clean linen, subtle florals, and something else, something rich, undeniably expensive, and vaguely masculine. She pushed herself up, her muscles aching with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that went beyond physical strain. Her mind, however, was disturbingly clear. The events of the private auction flooded back in a sickening rush. Silas's cruel accusations, the public humiliation, the cold certainty of ruin. And then Lorenzo. His devastating entrance, the holographic evidence, the crushing declaration of Silas's downfall, and finally, his possessive claim, all of it. Mine. She was in his penthouse. The realization settled over her, chilling and oddly comforting. The bed was enormous, its sheets a cool, heavy silk against her skin. She wore a soft, unfamiliar nightgown, clearly not hers, its delicate fabric a stark contrast to her utilitarian work clothes. Someone had undressed her, cleaned her, brought her here. The thought, usually invasive, brought only a strange, unsettling wave of gratitude. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet sinking into a thick plush carpet that felt like walking on clouds. The room was breathtaking. Panoramic windows offered a dizzying view of the city's skyline, a glittering tapestry of steel and light. Tasteful, minimalist furniture, bespoke artwork adorning the walls, a world away from her cramped apartment, from her father's cluttered antique shop. This was Lorenzo's domain, a fortress of wealth and power, both beautiful and terrifying. A faint rustle of fabric made her turn her head sharply. Lorenzo stood near the window, his back to her, gazing out at the city. He wore a dark, casual sweater and tailored trousers, a stark departure from his usual formal attire. But even in this relaxed state, his silhouette exuded an aura of contained power, a coiled tension that was uniquely his. He held a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly as he brought it to his lips. He sensed her wakefulness. His head tilted slightly, then he turned, his emerald eyes finding hers across the vast room. There was no surprise in his gaze, only a quiet, watchful intensity. "You're awake," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "How do you feel?" Anya clutched the silk sheets, the fabric cool against her feverish skin. Disoriented, she admitted, her voice hoarse and confused. "What happened after Silas? Silas Blackwood is no longer a concern." Lorenzo cut her off, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He walked towards a small table laden with a silver tray, fresh fruit, pastries, and a steaming carafe of coffee. "You need your strength." He poured her a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, a small gesture of domesticity that felt utterly surreal in this environment. Anya watched him, her eyes scanning his face. There was a faint bruise, almost imperceptible, high on his left cheekbone, and a small fresh cut on his lower lip. His knuckles, when he placed the coffee cup before her, were slightly scraped, the skin rougher than usual. He had been in the fray. He had fought for her. "You're hurt," she whispered, a pang of concern, raw and unexpected, hitting her. He dismissed it with a wave of his hand. A minor inconvenience. Nothing that won't heal. His gaze, however, held hers, a silent acknowledgement of the price he had paid, however small, for her freedom. "Silas," he continued, his voice hardening, "has been relieved of his assets. His bank accounts are frozen. His properties seized. His name, once synonymous with exclusive art, is now synonymous with fraud and money laundering. The authorities, thanks to certain anonymous tips and irrefutable evidence, are now very interested in his entire network. He will not see the light of day for a very long time, if ever. Anya listened, a morbid satisfaction spreading through her. Silas, the man who had tormented her, who had nearly destroyed her life, was utterly ruined. Not dead, no, but broken, stripped of the very power he craved. The justice, though meted out by a dark hand, felt undeniably right. The profound gratitude she felt for Lorenzo in that moment was overwhelming, a tidal wave washing away the last vestiges of her fear of Silas. "And my father's shop?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "The debts have been cleared," Lorenzo said, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "Any fraudulent claims against his name have been systematically disproven. Your father's name and his shop are safe. No one will touch them again." Tears pricked at Anya's eyes, hot and unwelcome. Relief, pure and unadulterated, washed over her, making her tremble. He had done it. He had truly saved everything. But the cost was her. "This is your world, isn't it?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the opulent yet stark penthouse. "Where fortunes are made and unmade with a phone call, where lives are decided with a whisper." He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "It is a world. One I navigate. One that, like it or not, you are now a part of." He paused, then took a seat on the edge of the bed, not too close, but close enough that his imposing presence filled her senses. "The price of protection, Anya, is allegiance. It is trust. It is understanding that what is mine stays mine. And you, little artist, are very much mine now." His words, a declaration of ownership, should have terrified her, should have made her fight, scream, run. And a small, defiant part of her did recoil. But a larger part, the part that had witnessed his ruthless efficiency, his unwavering resolve, his unexpected tenderness in the archives, felt a strange, unsettling peace. She had been tossed about by the whims of others for too long, vulnerable and alone. Now she was claimed, possessed. And with that came an undeniable, primal security. She looked at the small cut on his lip, the slight bruising on his cheek. He had put himself in harm's way for her. The thought solidified something within her, an unspoken acceptance. Her old life, the one where she fought battles alone, was gone. This was her new reality, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Her eyes met his, searching for something, anything beyond the possessive claim. She found it there, deep in his emerald gaze, a flicker of something raw, something that mirrored the vulnerability she had glimpsed days ago. A need? A profound, almost desperate need to protect, to possess, to keep safe. He reached out, his strong, warm hand covering hers where it rested on the silk sheet. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a gentle, almost hesitant gesture, yet brimming with unspoken meaning. "Good," he murmured, his voice husky. "Because from now on, your fight is my fight. Your peace is my responsibility. And your art will finally flourish, untouched by the shadows of others." He held her gaze, and in that silent, charged moment, Anya felt a bond solidify between them, a golden chain forged not just by coercion, but by shared trauma, unexpected empathy, and a dangerous, undeniable attraction. She was no longer just the art restorer, she was his chosen masterpiece, protected by a dark lord. And the thought, terrifying as it was, no longer filled her with dread. It filled her with a strange, fierce hope for a future she never knew she wanted. But even as she accepted his claim, a new question began to form in her mind, a subtle undercurrent beneath the overwhelming relief. Silas Blackwood was gone, but Lorenzo's world was vast, dangerous, and constantly shifting. What new challenges awaited her in this gilded cage? And how would she, the fragile artist, truly survive, and perhaps even thrive, under the intense, possessive gaze of the mafia boss who now owned her? Her new life had truly just begun, and the greatest tests, she sensed, were yet to come. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and ruby as Lorenzo drove, the hum of the luxury car a soft purr beneath them. Anya sat beside him, her hand resting almost unconsciously on his thigh. The quiet intimacy felt both alien and profoundly right. Silas Blackwood was a vanquished ghost, his empire shattered, his name synonymous with ruin. Anya's father's shop was safe, the crushing weight of debt lifted as if by magic. A true sense of peace, fragile yet fierce, bloomed in her chest. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice soft, laced with a hopeful curiosity she hadn't dared to feel in years. Lorenzo spared her a glance, his lips curving into a rare, genuine smile that softened the hard lines of his jaw. "Somewhere you belong." He parked in a quieter, more artistic district, where historic brownstones mingled with renovated commercial spaces. The building before them was modern, yet blended seamlessly with its surroundings, its large glass facade gleaming under the streetlights. A discreet lease sign was taped to the door. Lorenzo got out, walking around to open her door, his movements fluid and chivalrous. Anya stepped onto the cool pavement, her gaze fixed on the building. Her heart began to pound with an unfamiliar anticipation. He led her to the entrance, heavy key turning smoothly in the lock. As he pushed open the door, a wave of light, warm, and inviting spilled out. Anya gasped. The space was vast, open, and flooded with natural light from enormous windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city's skyline, a glittering tapestry of dreams. The walls were pristine white, the floor a rich, polished wood. It smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. "Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She walked forward, her steps slow, reverent. This wasn't just a space. It was a sanctuary, a dream made tangible. She touched the smooth, cool surface of a long, custom-built workbench, her fingers trembling. "You didn't." He stood behind her, his presence a comforting warmth at her back. "I did," he said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "A clean slate. A place where your art can truly flourish, untouched by shadows." Anya turned to face him, her eyes glistening. "You bought this for me?" Disbelief warred with an overwhelming, almost painful joy. "For us," he corrected gently, his green eyes burning into hers, possessive and tender. "You will run it, create in it. And no one, Anya, will ever again tax your talent, threaten your door, or question your integrity. This is yours, your haven, protected." Tears streamed down her face, hot and cleansing. She ran her hands over the pristine walls, envisioning canvases, brushes, the organized chaos of her true passion. "My dream," she whispered, the words barely audible. "You remembered." "I always listen," he said, stepping closer, his hands sliding to her waist, pulling her gently against him. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against hers. "You are my chosen masterpiece, Anya. The purest thing I have ever found in this dirty city. And like any masterpiece, you will be cherished, protected, obsessed over." She looked up at him, her heart overflowing with a dangerous, intoxicating blend of gratitude, love, and a profound acceptance of the dark, powerful man who now held her so completely. "That's a very big promise for a mafia boss," she teased softly, a small smile breaking through her tears. His gaze intensified, his lips curving into that familiar, unreadable smirk. "I don't make promises I won't keep." He lowered his head, his breath warm on her lips. "This is our happily ever after, amore. Not quiet, perhaps, but ours, and perfectly protected." Then he kissed her, under the city lights, in the space he had built for her dreams. It was a kiss that tasted of freedom and possession, of danger and profound love. Her hands slid up to his shoulders, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in her newly reshaped world. He was her darkness, her light, her ultimate protector, and her eternal captor. And for the first time in her life, Anya felt truly, undeniably at home. Isn't it true that sometimes our greatest masterpieces aren't found on a canvas, but within the strength of our own spirit? Anya's journey reminds us that being vulnerable doesn't diminish your worth. It reveals a depth deserving of fierce protection. Even when the world tries to define you by your past scars, true love, even a dangerous one, can see the pure, untarnished art within. You, too, deserve someone who sees your light and guards it with everything they have. If Anya's story resonated with a masterpiece hidden inside you, hit like and subscribe. Share your thoughts below, perhaps with "I am seen" or "My worth is art." Join our community where every heart finds its canvas.